Now we have a question from our audience. Once again, I am MSc Civil Engineer, MBA and Registered Professional Engineer. So how can I get a job in Australia? Kindly suggest me.
Well, the search for a job you should probably undertake through SEEK in Australia, SEEK, and see what jobs are being advertised. But as a civil engineer and people with strong engineering backgrounds, you're going to need to have a resume which details all of your qualifications and your experience, and you have to also be in a situation where you can pass the IELTS test and have your qualifications recognised in Australia. So that's all part of the skilled migration program. It's very difficult to find a job when you're sitting in Bangladesh and the position's being advertised in Australia. But at the end of the day, if you keep your eyes peeled, something might come up. But in the meantime, there is no downside to going to Skill Select and launching an expression of interest, because you'll see how you're scoring as against the criteria that assess the application. An expression of interest costs nothing. And it's a very good way of getting yourself, as it were, into the mix for the consideration. So you might get a visa on that basis. But the Skill Select process is transparent and it's a points-based system. So I would recommend that.
How can a potential immigrants ensure their qualifications and work experiences are recognized in Australia?
No problem. So if I'm a civil engineer, then there is a legislative instrument which tells us what assessing organisation is charged with the task of assessing qualifications. So, for example, an engineer would have to provide their details and make an application through Engineers Australia. Engineers Australia would then recognise the qualifications and the experience, and that positive skills assessment would drive the application. So there's a legislative instrument which sets out all the individual assessing authorities. Engineers Australia, you might have a trade which could be assessed by either an organisation called Vet Assess, or you could get assessed by TRA. So there's this big schedule which says if your occupation is engineer, then you look across the schedule and then you can see that it's Engineers Australia. And all that information is available on the immigration websites. And a lot of information is published by migration agents who are actively engaged in this field.
We have known that after COVID-19, there are so many chefs left your country. So Australian governments are looking for so many chefs from all across the world. Is that true?
Yeah, it is true, because what happened was during COVID, people who held temporary visas, like a 482, for example, couldn't get any government support.
It's not permanent.
Yeah, so that's the temporary visa. So the temporary visa leads into a process where after 3 years holding a temporary visa, a visa subclass 482, you can proceed to a permanent visa. So there's nothing stopping a person who's got chefing qualifications, who undergoes a skills assessment, who can speak English at the right level, for that person to lodge an application in Skill Select. But having contacts on the ground in Australia is also very useful, because Australia is really quite a small place. Everybody really knows each other. And so it might be within your circle of friends that you've got an associate who's already working in a restaurant where the boss is looking for a chef. Under those circumstances, you could be sponsored for migration to Australia, in some cases for a permanent visa.
So now can you please tell us about health workers visa?
Okay, so health workers, medical practitioners and nurses, there's a big worldwide shortage of nurses and medical practitioners. The biggest impediment to those people being able to migrate to Australia is the skills recognition process. Anybody who's already a registered nurse has got qualifications and experience not only in Bangladesh but also overseas, they should be able to come onshore and upgrade their qualifications through some bridging course. But in the case of medical practitioners, it's a bit more complicated because you have the professional colleges. There's another sort of a visa called a medical treatment visa, which is really for a person who needs to undertake medical treatment in Australia, for that person to apply for permission to be able to travel to Australia, for example, to have some corrective surgery. Under those circumstances, what you need to do is you need to clearly establish that you have the need for the surgery and that at the end of the surgery, it's your intention to return home. And that's what's called the genuine temporary entrant visa. Mm-hmm. So what you would do is you would say, I've got this particular condition, I've got an appointment to see this particular specialist, and I'm booked in for surgery at a particular hospital in Australia. That would be the ideal application. But the question at the overseas post will always be asking is, well, why are you travelling to Australia for the surgery? Well, it might be that you have a view that your condition is best treated in Australia. But that question about whether or not you are a genuine temporary entrant is always first and foremost in the mind of the assessing officer.